I'm going to give you a bit of an overview in terms of what the cluster's been doing over the last sort of 12 months. I should sort of start by saying that we actually officially launched the cluster at this event last year, so we're just over 12 months old. It's not been an easy journey. We haven't been given pots of money by the government to undertake our activities. It is as we like to say, a coalition of the willing. We are a group of people that are passionate about what we're trying to do and trying to bring the West Midlands activities together in terms of robotics and develop that. We are talking to national and local government to try and encourage them to support us. But I think the important thing here is that we've got a dedicated group of people that really believe in what we're trying to do, and we're trying to make it happen. And we're always looking for more participants to help us on that journey. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a report that was done. It was commissioned by the West Midlands Combined Authority and undertaken by Make UK, looking at the value of robotics and autonomous systems in the West Midlands itself. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the outcomes from that report, because it is very relevant for what we're trying to do. I'm also then going to talk to you a little bit about the mission to Denmark. As Steve mentioned, we are undertaking a series of visits we've been to Denmark, we're going to the US, and we're going to go to Singapore to try and learn lessons from the cluster activities in other parts of the world, so that we can bring them back to the West Midlands, and then obviously we can accelerate our development based on what we've learned from engagement with those other clusters. And we're also hoping to build stronger relationships with those clusters so that we can then develop more international activities as well as our local activities. So in terms of that report, as I said, it was undertaken by Make UK on behalf of the West Midlands Combined Authority. They basically combined a survey of various industrial businesses in the West Midlands, together with some qualitative interviews with a number of participants. So some of the data was quantitative, some of it was qualitative, but it was very encouraging in terms of the outputs that were generated. The first question they really asked was how many businesses have got any form of robotics autonomous systems in their activities today. And as you can see, quite a lot. Not surprisingly, the larger businesses very much have robotics autonomous systems of one form or another within their operations. We all know that businesses like JLR have got thousands of robots in their factories, so we'd expect the businesses at the top end of the size rate to be using all this technology. As we get down to the smaller businesses, you can see the 10 to 249 employees at the far this side of the chart. Obviously the numbers are a lot less. And I think the other thing that came out of the survey was that this did capture any activity in terms of RAS, so it did include all sorts of, let's say, lower level technology use, not necessarily full-blown automated robot systems. But everybody's got it on the agenda. I think that's probably the important thing, with possible exception of maybe about half of the SMEs. And that kind of indicates they're a target that we need to be getting at. One of the interesting points that came out of the survey is that those businesses that have got some kind of international involvement, either they're subsidiaries of international businesses or they're businesses that have got subsidiaries overseas, they've got much stronger robotics autonomous systems activity than those that are purely UK based. Perhaps not a surprise, but I think it's worth recognising that businesses that have got international exposure are certainly seeing more interest and more activity related to robotics than maybe those that are purely based in the UK. This one was kind of interesting in terms of why people are expecting to be using robotic systems. And perhaps not surprisingly, increased productivity was the most important issue that most of the businesses were actually citing. And I think you probably see along the line there quality, cost savings, safety, flexibility, all of those points are not surprising necessarily. The one that kind of stood out as being a little bit different was resilience to labour shortages. And the reason it's down at the end of the chart is that most people put it lower down in terms of priorities, but an awful lot of people put it on the chart. So there's a big percentage of people that recognised that labour shortages and resilience to labour shortages was important, but it was never the most important factor. And productivity was, in more cases, the most important factor. And I think that kind of reflects a lot of the conversation that we had yesterday about driving productivity within UK, but also West Midlands manufacturing businesses. We need to do more to improve productivity. We then looked at the barriers. What were the key barriers? And again, I don't think there's much surprise necessarily with the items that are on the list. Cost, integration with legacy equipment, lack of skilled personnel, and so on. I think we'd all expect to see these kind of issues appearing. But the one that really stood out was the high initial cost. That seems to be the biggest barrier to adoption in the West Midlands. It's perhaps not surprising, given, if you like, that the SMEs are generally the sector or the area that aren't using as much robotics as the larger businesses, and therefore cost is going to be an important issue. But I think it's kind of worth reflecting on that. We've got to find ways of helping them get past that high initial cost. And we were talking about things like finance yesterday, and how we can help financing these kind of businesses to adopt these kind of technologies, and helping them with the business case to ensure that they can justify it correctly. So I think that illustrates that finance is an important issue for an awful lot of West Midlands businesses. But then the other side of that was we did ask how many are expanding or looking to expand their use of RAS in the next 3 years. And as you can see, 58% said yes, and 35% said they were thinking about it. So there's a significant level of interest within the West Midlands towards the adoption of RAS technologies. So despite the fact that maybe they see that it's expensive, they see the benefits of improving productivity and resilience to labour, for example, as making it worthy of consideration. So it does show that there's a great opportunity there, providing we can help these businesses get over their initial barriers and hurdles. So that was the report. It's just giving you a flavour of it. It's accessible via our website if you want to read more. The next thing I just want to cover in not in lots of detail, but just to give you a flavour of, was the visit we made to Denmark. The visits we're making, as I said, we're going to the US, we're going to Mass Robotics in Boston, and we're going to Pittsburgh, two of the leading clusters in North America, and we're also planning to go to Singapore to get a different, if you like, an Asian perspective on what they're doing in terms of robotics clusters. This is being funded by the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, of which the MTC is a part. So we've gained the funding to do that. And what we're trying to do, as I said, is meet the key stakeholders and organisations so we can understand what they're doing, what lessons they've learned, what they got wrong, what they've got right, what impact they're generating, so that we can bring that information home. We will publish a report which will be in the public domain once we've finished all the visits, and the objective is to finish the visits before Christmas, so the report's not going to be that far away. And ultimately, we want to use that report, to help us learn and help us get better, but also to help lobby our national and local government, hopefully to gain some funding to support the kind of activities that we want to undertake. We visited Denmark, the Odense Robotics Cluster, and the team was MTC, ARIA, the Advanced Robotics and Invention Agency, and DSIT, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. We visited a number of different organisations, almost all of whom are based in the Odense area. The only one that isn't on that list is How To Robot, who are in Copenhagen. Everybody else is within 20 miles of Odense city itself. We visited Southern University Denmark, particularly looking at their large structure production. And the reason they're doing large structure production is, for those that don't know, Odense used to have a big shipyard. And that is the initial stimulus that started their interest in robotics. And the closure of that shipyard then stimulated investment in robotics in the region, because they were looking for things, alternatives, if you like, to shipbuilding as a way of regenerating their industrial capability. That's why the large structure production is a particular interest in the Southern University, because they're used to welding things like ships. So what else can we do? They don't build ships anymore, but they do a lot of ship repair still. So there is still interest in shipbuilding, but they're also looking at things like wind turbines. Again, large structures. And for those that don't know, Denmark is home to a number of significant wind turbine manufacturers. We visited Odense Robotics, which started as a cluster in the region. And more recently, it's become the National Robotics Cluster. It's taken over, if you like, the responsibility for robotics across the whole of Denmark. We also visited Invest in Odense, which is the, if you like, the regional government, and it's their investment group. And that was useful to understand why they were investing in these kind of activities. We visited the DTI, Danish Technological Institute, which again is an organisation very much like the MTC, but obviously based in Odense. And two things that they undertake through that organisation is the support to the SMEs. They provide advice, technical assistance to help SMEs adopt robots. And they also have a startup incubator within that facility. And I'll come back to that in a minute. We then did also visit Teradyne, which is the owners of Universal Robots. Now, for those that don't know, Universal Robots really were the creator of the collaborative robot. And Teradyne acquired Universal Robots and MIA, the mobile robot platform, a few years ago. So we were actually at the Universal Robots facility. It's very impressive, by the way. But I should add, they're all based in the Odense area. So the guys that started Universal Robots came out of the Odense area. So it is very much a cluster that's been successful. Teradyne was an important element of that success. It helped build their global recognition, which I think is one of the important factors. It's helped Odense cluster become something that everybody around the world recognises, because when Teradyne bought Universal Robots, it kind of elevated the awareness, if you like, of the cluster activity. We also visited How To Robot, and those that were in the Knowledge Bites yesterday will have heard from How To Robot, but they're fundamentally an organisation that helps businesses acquire robot automation systems. And they have a slightly different perspective, if you like, on the market and the needs of the market. And it was useful to hear direct from them in the Danish market. And as I said yesterday, Denmark is a long way ahead of us. They're 7th on the robot density table. We're 23rd. So it's useful to get a perspective on the activities that are being undertaken in Denmark. Why are they adopting a lot more robots than we are? Things that we can learn from them. So we kind of visited all the key players in that region. And just to give you a feel for what's going on in that region, I'm not going to talk you through all of the data in there, but there's a few kind of key things in there for me. There's over 400 companies in Denmark, which is a relatively small country, but there's over 400 companies in Denmark that are operating in robotics. And I'm not talking about users. These are people delivering or developing technology. More than 260 startups and scale-ups. So there's a lot of activity about developing new solutions. And one of the key things for me is that they've got this joined up. And that's the difference between what we have in the UK and what they have in Denmark. These businesses talk to each other. They work together. So certainly with Universal Robots and Teradyne acquiring Universal Robots, that's certainly helped in terms of a vehicle that's then enabled greater collaboration, such like it's made people a lot more aware, and they are attracting startups from other parts of the world into Odense because it's seen as a good place to interact with other startups and build businesses. And that's the kind of ambition that we want for the West Midlands. We want to bring that into the UK and replicate that kind of activity. And I should add, DSIT did do a study this year, a few months ago, looking at how many businesses in the UK are involved in RAS technologies. And I know the list needs a little bit more work to qualify it properly, but there were more than 2,000 companies on that list in the UK. And some of them we've never heard of. And you kind of think we ought to know who these businesses are. And we're just not very good at joining this kind of information up. We need to find better ways of helping these startups scale up into significant businesses in the UK. And that's really what it's all about. Just to give you an idea a little bit more on the startups. So the Startup Hub, which is the hub based in the DTI, the Danish Technological Institute, they now have 34 startups operating in that hub itself. As you can see, a significant number of them do survive, and some of these have become quite significant businesses in their own right. One of the interesting points really is that the guys that started the original businesses, people like Universal Robots, people like Mir, when they sold those businesses, they weren't quite the same as we are in the UK. They didn't go and move to the Bahamas and buy a big yacht with all the money they generated. They stayed where they live, and they're reinvesting the money that they've generated into these kind of startups. Not necessarily because they're being very benevolent and all the rest of it. They want to make a return on it, but they are putting money back into the local community, if you like, and helping more startups grow within the area of the cluster. And I think that's one of the important factors. We need to build more of a community, get more people talking to each other. And I think that's one of the key lessons that we learn. There's lots of other detail that I won't go into now in terms of things that we should be looking at. But to me, one of the key things is it is much more of a community. It's based in a relatively small area. People do talk to each other. People do work with each other. A lot of these startups are in the same facility. They're actually cooperating, helping each other develop their technology. And I think that's the kind of thing we should be aspiring to in the West Midlands and more widely in the UK. So with that's kind of giving you a quick overview in terms of where we are. I'd like to invite the panel to come and join me here, and we will happily answer some questions. So Rachel, Chris, Tom, do you want to come up? As Steve mentioned, we've got the QR codes via the Mentimeter, so please feel free if you want to ask any questions from the audience, please do. We would certainly welcome your questions. I've got a couple to start off because I know audiences are very cautious sometimes about getting involved. But maybe, Tom, if I could start with you, just because you're in the middle, but why do you think RAS needs a cluster in the West Midlands?
I think the West Midlands is such an important area for manufacturing. We need to get this right. If you look at the history of the West Midlands, if you look at what's currently here, we probably have the most SMEs in this West Midlands cluster. And as you've seen from that earlier slide, it's the SMEs that really need the first push in how to get into automation. So I think if we can get this, as Mike said on a number of occasions there, we need to join the dots together. We need to get the academics, the manufacturers, the OEMs, everybody to join these dots up together. And if we can get this right in the West Midlands cluster, with the amount of SMEs we have in this, it should be easy to replicate and roll out into the bigger companies.
Great, thanks, Tom. Chris, have you got, as an SME, what's your view on that?
Well, yeah, if you look at where we are in terms of productivity in the UK compared with the rest of the world, we need to automate. We've got a skills shortage, so we need to automate, but also productivity. SMEs in the UK have been hesitant to take on automation. I think we've got 6 or 7 ideas of what we can do. But as Tom said, and you said, Mike, it's really, we just need to join up the dots. We need to help SMEs and show the automation that is there. And that's the whole point of the cluster, isn't it?
Yeah. Rachel, have you got anything to add to that, your perspective?
Yeah, I think having, not as a non-manufacturer, but working in the manufacturing sector, up and down the supply chain, and particularly with SMEs, one of the big issues is how do SMEs get hold of information How do they know who are the trusted advisors? Often we talk about a grant culture, but that's not necessarily true. Yes, grants and funds help, but sometimes there's even, how do I apply for a proper formal loan? I need help in doing that. And I think that's part of what the cluster wants to build on, is the connectivity up and down the supply chain and across the peers within the cluster. And if we can help do that, that's one big tick in the exchange information.
And related to that, Rachel, because I know your background is kind of supply chains in particular, but which sectors do you see as being kind of important in the West Midlands? You know, obviously automotive's important, but where else do you think?
Yeah, automotive I think is the leader because of some of the big brand names that we've got here. But equally, I think across the West Midlands, we don't shout about what we do, full stop, but we have a really strong food and drink sector. Yes, we could say Mondelez, Cadbury's are a good leader, an example of the adoption of robotics. But we can go to many chicken farms and processing units that is still all manual. Again, productivity and efficiency in the food and drink sector, both for home consumption, health and safety, cleanliness, but also export. There's another area ripe for adoption. Other transport manufacturing areas, medical, technology, particularly to support the NHS, but as an ageing population, adaptations and tools. So I think those would be my top three.
Yeah. Tom, have you got any others to add to that from
No, I think
perspective?
food and drink is certainly something we're really seeing a rise in adoption at the moment. I think aerospace is another one that there's an awful lot of work going on in how to invest in the new automation. I think automotive can pretty much look after itself. I mean, as you've seen from the size of the companies there's not much any of us could really tell them about how to adopt automation. It's my issue is how we reach. We've all been saying this message for a number of years now, and I think it's been going on and on and on. Obviously, we're not landing it. I don't know how we get it to land at the place it needs to land because the SMEs are not necessarily hearing it. And like we say, the one there about cost. Cost is very important, obviously, but it should be the return on investment question they're asking, not the cost. I mean, if it costs a lot of money but it pays back in 12 months, then it's not a problem. So we need to really get all of this across. I would go with the SMEs in across that whole range, that whole gamut of industries that we need to get to, and how we can keep them once they do start, how we can keep them in the West Midlands or in the UK in general.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Chris, as an SME, what do you agree with those barriers that we saw earlier, or do you see something slightly different in terms of why people haven't done it?
I agree with the principles, but also I take Tom's point. It is about return on investment rather than the initial outlay of capital, because you can borrow money. There's all sorts of funds available. But I also think there's not many, and this is something that the cluster is going to start doing, the sort of good news stories that this worked well, this didn't work. We almost need to do a bit of a case study for SMEs, so we don't just make the same mistakes that every SME makes. So you put a robot in, you put the investment in, it doesn't work because you didn't have the right skills or you didn't pick the right product. It doesn't work, you mothball it and you don't touch it again for 10 years. So we need to get past that. We need to fast track as a group SME sort of education and understanding, because we do need to automate in terms of skills shortage and productivity. If we don't, we're going to be further behind than ever. So now is the time to actually do it, I think.
Yeah. Actually, well, maybe Tom first, but a couple of questions from the audience which are related. But how does the cluster, or how do we see the cluster supporting sectors outside of manufacturing? So healthcare, defence were being referred to, also construction, given that there's a very large infrastructure project being built in the kind of local area. But related to that, there's a need to build lots more houses, for example. So how can the cluster help in, if you like, non-manufacturing kind of sectors?
Well, a lot of it is still manufacturing. It's just a different type of manufacturing, obviously. I mean, I think what we need to help is letting those manufacturers or those companies know what can be done. I think sometimes it's everybody's heard of robotics or automation, but they don't necessarily know what it is. And at the moment, if you listen in the press, it seems to be robots seems to be everything from a machine to a bit of clever AI. It's just all lumped under the same umbrella, and it doesn't mean anything. What we're talking about here is today's technology and how to use today's technology. It's important to support the startup companies who are coming up with really clever ideas for tomorrow's technologies. But if we don't use today's technologies, we're not going to be able to use tomorrow's technologies. We're just further behind. So I think we just need to get in there, show people what can be done. And I think the RAS, the cluster, could be really good for that because it's non-partisan, it's not FANUC, it's not any individual robot company or automation company. It's speaking for the whole industry. I mean, obviously, I've got a horse in this race on, getting people to uptake on automation. But I'd rather that we grew the market, not grew my market share. I'm happy if we just keep growing that market, and I'll take the same percentage of market. So yeah, I think it's letting them know what. I mean, we've got a lot of stuff already in construction industry. We're tiling panels to go up in some of these quick fit temporary housing. There's lots of stuff that can be done, lots of plumbing stuff, lots of everything. So it's not. There is no in today's technology, and I think as you said it earlier on. It will do what it says on the tin now. I think there's a lot of history of maybe 30 years ago where decision makers got stung with a bit of this. Somebody sold them a robot that didn't really do what it said it could do, and they're still scared of adopting it. And now they're obviously the people writing the checks. So we need to get it out there that it will do what it says. We need to prove it. We need to show it. We've got enough case studies around between all of the robot companies, in a lot of them in this geographical area, to say that it can be done, it is being done, and we need to join together to do that.
Yeah. Rach, a slightly different question, but it's kind of related. It's really around training, I think, of SME managers and workers to kind of understand what robots could do for them, what the whole life process is like, and how they might integrate automation into their processes. Kind of any thoughts as to what we could do to help facilitate that?
I think most of us will recognise that owner managers, MDs of small companies do everything within that company. From opening the door to closing the door and in between wise, along with the important decisions. So leadership in SMEs is different than leadership in corporates. And so we need to be able to promote the message in a format that is easy for them to both access, understand. So case studies is one of our tasks in terms of how we can get those together and then share and promote them. But also getting somebody in front of them that can talk them through the initial stages of the why and the how. And it's not necessarily the person, the MD or the owner, that is the right person to do that. So again, finding and helping them understand it, it might be their team leader or their production manager. And I think that again is a little bit of what we're hoping to build into the RAS offer, is that there'll be somebody independent that can talk you through how to get started. We will never, either Mike or I, want to sell you a FANUC or a KUKA. But at the point that you say, this is what we're interested in, we'd make the introduction and the referral. So it's part of that circle. And I think the key message is that we don't have the clear answers to yet. And having worked across the supply chain and business support for far too many years, it's an ever-changing need, is the messaging. But yeah, I think leaders, it's educating as well.
Yeah. Chris, have you got, again, your experience as a...
Well, yeah, I think we're 12 months into the cluster now, and I think we're here again today to say, come and get involved. Tell us what you need, tell us what sectors you're working in, what problems, what process issues you've got. And between this team, and there's a wider team that aren't here today, we will come up with solutions. Because we've got to get this cluster working. You look at Odense and you look at America, where clusters work, GDP has gone up, but also employment has gone up. with the use of automation, because those companies have got busier and better, and that's what we need to do across the Midlands. So I'd say get involved and tell us the issues you've got, and then we'll come up with solutions.
No, that's great. Tom, the slightly different angle now, but one of the questions that's coming from the audience was, how do we help develop and retain innovative SMEs developing robot solutions? So I guess the integrators, people developing the technology now, how do we keep them in the West Midlands? How do we help them grow?
I mean, that is a massive problem, and we do need to learn how to get maybe the second round of funding sorted out. Most startups, if they got a good enough idea, will get that first round of funding from somewhere, and it's not very easy to get, but it's relatively straightforward. Unfortunately, some of our decision making after that, once they get to the next round of funding, it's not as easy to get, so they end up going to America or somewhere, and the whole product goes to America. So I think we've got to realise that this isn't just a one-off shot at some of these startup companies. If you look at a number of those companies that were up there from Denmark, they've had 2 or 3 rounds of funding where they've had to keep it going. It hasn't really took off straight away, and it works for the second time or the third time. So we need to make sure that we go with that whole journey. If it is a good idea, let's stick with it. Let's not send it off somewhere else. Let's see the benefit. So I think it's most of the things I see from not keeping it in the West Midlands is the future funding. I think that's the answer we've got to get to. Now, there is a lot of funding out there, and we've just got to join up how they get to the correct funding. I think money or funding isn't necessarily the issue. There is funding out there, but maybe people are not looking in the right direction. So something that the cluster can do is point you in the right direction of future funding and how to get there.
Yeah, thanks. So, Rachel, similar question, if you like. It's related, so you can build on what Tom just said. But how can we help the academics, if you like, so the people that are developing some of this technology, maybe before it even gets to startups, again, how can we help make sure that we exploit the clever tech that's coming out of our universities into our region?
Okay, so there is lots of clever tech, both in universities and in catapults. But if I'm honest, and maybe when you ask Chris the question, he'll go, but we don't know about it. So it's again a question about how that is communicated and shared. Academics will do it as theoretical papers, because that's how they get measured and get their ticks in the boxes. SMEs don't read that, manufacturers don't read them. So it's how we convert those into trade journals, just to get the messaging out. But for me, more importantly, is how somebody within their advisory network can share that information with them and make that referral. The number of companies that I'll say, have you been to the MTC? And they'll go, no, it's not for me. Have you ever been to the University of Birmingham or Aston? And they look at you like, why would I want to do that? I went there when I was 18, 19, 20. I don't want to go back. Which that's even worse, because they do recognise that's there. But I think there is something about, I've said this several times today, communication, messaging, opening the doors, and having within that advisory group for each company, because they will have advisors. I spend a lot of time talking to lawyers and accountants, because I know that quite often that is where the owner manager of a company will go to for their first point of help. So yeah, there's an education piece outside of the pure sector as well. Unfortunately, then I'm going to take which comes to the access to funds. I mean, our next event includes a specific session on how to raise funds, both as loans, soft loans, or as pure finance, because lots of people still don't understand how you write that investment business case into an application for funding. So yeah, there's lots of communication of things that are already there and have existed for a while. But yeah, people are busy, and it's how they get them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. Chris, I don't. Hopefully, this is something in your area of activity.
Sure,
but one suggestion, if you like, is can the cluster influence the design and delivery of existing programs, like Made Smarter, for example, so that they are exploiting RAS more. Any comment on
Absolutely.
that?
I think we've got an ideal opportunity now to find out exactly what SMEs need in the region, and then we can go back and we can steer what Made Smarter and other people are doing. The whole premise of an SME now is 50 million turnover and 250 people. There's lots of businesses within this region who haven't anywhere hit that threshold on turnover, but have too many people to be classed as an SME. So, for example, they can't then get Made Smarter funding. Now, if they haven't hit the level of turnover, but they've got too many people over 250, that says to me there's productive gains to have there. And what we're not doing is allowing them to access people like Made Smarter. So the whole point of Made Smarter is to do digitisation and increase productivity. If we're not allowing access for lots of businesses because they've got too many people, but they haven't got the level of turnover, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot. And almost we need to wait for the industrial strategy, look at what they're going to offer in terms of investment for automation, and then go back to government, central government to start with, but also people like Made Smarter. And we need to change the way that funding is accessed and the parameters that are put in place, because we're stopping some companies who could easily increase productivity with some Made Smarter digitisation, but they can't access it because they're not an SME.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And
Mike, I think just to add to that, I think now is a really critical time with the industrial strategy announcement relatively soon. I think everybody needs to at least understand the headlines and what that means for them in terms of accessing the right support for them, whether they do that on their own or with somebody else. I'm sure at some point when it's released and we'll have a conversation about how it works for RAS, we will share that. But there are, I think we all know there's lots of barriers. Chris mentioned one, but there are ways to be creative and work around a lot of those. So ask the questions and we'll see how we can help.
And there's a question coming from the audience on the industrial strategy, so
Okay.
you can get your crystal balls out if you like, but do we expect anything substantial to come from the industrial strategy on RAS adoption? Tom, do you want to?
Yeah, I think so. We've had a number of discussions at various levels with people in government. I think the good thing is at the moment, this current government, while it's not doing a lot of things very well, does seem to have a strategy. I mean, the previous government talked about having a strategy, but it was just a load of different individual policies that never really added up to a strategy. So yes, I think this government is in a position where it's willing to listen. I think it understands manufacturing better. I think it knows the importance now of manufacturing in the UK, and if you take that greater picture that was done with the Oxford economics one, where with direct, indirect and induced factors, manufacturing made up about 24% of GDP. I mean, it's too important not to worry about. So we do need to keep on. So yes, I do believe that I am going to give them the benefit of the doubt for the moment.
Chris, have you got anything to add to that?
I think you'll be very surprised.
And
I think they will. I don't think they'll mention robotics per se. I think they'll mention productivity and skills gap, which is something that we know RAS can help with.
Yeah.
I don't think they talk enough about manufacturing in the government per se. The fact that we are holding the economy up. You see, unfortunately, the news about Morelli this week with the tariffs and everything else. Losing manufacturing jobs in the UK is not a good sign. So we do need more support, and let's hope there's something in that industrial strategy for us.
Do you want to add
I'm
anything,
with Chris. I think there'll be something around productivity, but it won't be specific, and therefore there will still be a lot of lobbying to convert generic productivity support into the real activity that each sector will want.
Yeah, for those that weren't here yesterday, which does include the three guys on the panel, we did have Greg Clark here yesterday, who is an advisor into the Industrial Strategy Commission. He didn't give us any kind of inside track, but he gave us a couple of hints, and he did say manufacturing is in there. We should expect to see something on manufacturing, And he did say productivity is in there. We should expect to see something on productivity. And he kind of hinted that robotics might get a mention, purely on the logic, if you like, is if you need manufacturing, if you need productivity, then you need robots as well. So let's just wait and see. He obviously hasn't seen the final document, and he did say that he hadn't seen it because it's not up to him. But if there's anybody within a few miles of this place that knows more about it than anybody else, he's probably it. So let's see what he says. Let's see what the document says. Sort of another question from the audience. What are the practical ways the cluster will facilitate collaboration and knowledge sharing? Rachel, do you want to kick off with that?
Okay, so in terms of collaboration, we have a website which is open for people to contact us, make comments. The one thing I think you might have underplayed slightly is the two key partners within RAS are University of Birmingham and the MTC, both of which have staff that are available to aid that collaboration. So initially, if you had a conversation with one of us today, we'd say, okay, so what's the germ of the idea? Let's follow up. But as soon as you start to talk to one of us, we'll go, okay, so that would be a good person to collaborate with, whether that is the academic or the specialist or even another company. Because quite often that's the bit that's missing in a lot of those collaborations, is either we've missed out the specialists or we've missed out a co-manufacturer to help that go along the journey. So in terms of collaboration, and at each of our events, we do a networking and quite say, if you think there's somebody in the room you would like to meet, come and talk to one of us and we'll do that introduction. So we've done that already and we plan to do it again. So that's the collaboration bit. The other bit, sorry, Mike, was?
I've forgotten. I've moved on. Hang on a minute.
Come and talk to us, I think, is the solution.
I think the key about the cluster, Mike, is that we've got machine manufacturers, integrators, education, business, all within the cluster.
Yes.
So we're trying to cover everything within this cluster. If you've got an issue, come to us. Somebody in the cluster will facilitate an answer for you.
Yeah. One other question which I'm going to answer. Somebody's made the point that there is expected to be the government's technology adoption review published in the very near future. Yes, that's true. The cluster effectively provided input into that because we hosted a meeting here on behalf of the technology adoption review with Julia Sutcliffe, who's the chief scientific advisor to the Department of Business and Trade, and we invited to that a number of robotics vendors and systems integrators and some users into that meeting that provided feedback to the technology adoption review. It wasn't specifically labelled as a cluster activity, but the majority of the participants came from the West Midlands, so we very much got our input into that. Tom was there. I don't think you've got anything to add, Tom.
Yeah, no, I think that I think government now does understand what is needed, and I think that's something that we've been missing for too many years. And I think that event there, I think it was almost deja vu because it was the same thing we probably said before, but I think it is that getting adopted now. It is getting understood, and I think a lot of it will be addressed shortly and will be addressed for the better, I think, for sure.
And Mike, I think one of the other aspects that across the group of us on the RAS steering committee is that we all, with different hats on, have access to Department for Trade, the technology adopters, the funders and the policy departments. Not that we talk to them on a daily basis, but we all have regular access and we'll get asked to provide not our opinion, but the people that we're representing. So I quite get asked what are the metal sector's views on. I know Chris does the same thing, particularly for SMEs and manufacturing, and you do it within the robotics world, so and as does Mike. So I think access to feed information back reinforces that this is a two-way process.
Yeah. And just to add to that, we're very keen to engage with not just yourselves, but the wider West Midlands activity so that we understand the particular challenges that are being faced in the West Midlands and feed that into these conversations as well, not just our own personal views. Chris, anything you want to add to that point?
Yeah, I think, as you said, this is more about gathering the information. The cluster are here to be a conduit to get funding, to get information over. What we need is now interaction. Tell us what the issues are, and then we can solve them. Because we haven't got all the answers. We've spent 12 months gathering information, but this is a long journey. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
I would think one thing that I would ask people to do or advise people to do is get involved with the cluster early. Where we seem to, and before it gets to the stage where you are manufacturing, when you've come up with a clever idea, you've got some clever physics, clever math, clever whatever else that you're coming up with, a lot of the times there, people don't know how to manufacture that product. They've got no idea, the startup company, so they'll try and make something. But what you should really be doing is engaging with the cluster so that you can manufacture, or you can build that to be automated. Because you can't really automate really effectively afterwards if you didn't consider automation at the design phase. So that's a phase 2 or 3 steps before it would ever get to us. But engage the cluster and say, we have this, how do we get this? How would we manufacture it? What would be the most efficient way to do that? Because there is like I say, there is a lot of information there of similar products, similar ways of doing things. So engage early, a lot earlier than you probably think you would engage, I would suggest.
That's a good point, Tom, because what you find is SMEs normally try to use automation on a problem product or a problem process. Well, it's too late. You almost need to design the process for automation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And kind of related to that, one of the questions from the audience, are there systemic failings in the UK that have created the issues we have today related to the adoption and scale up of technology?
Yeah, governments.
Do you want to expand on that, Chris?
There's not enough funding, there's not enough effort put into SMEs. I mean, JLR have got robots and it's easy for them. For an SME with no robotics to take the first step into automation is daunting, and there's 100 things that will put you off. What we need to do is make it easier through either funding, case studies, whatever it is, because once you've got automation in, all you do is grow and grow with automation. But we need to focus on SMEs rather than bigger business.
It's a fair comment.
I think none of us know what we don't know. There's a lot of knowledge and help and support out there. And in a busy world, it's about lifting your head and thinking, I'm going to have to spend some time finding out, because the help is there and the technology is there. But Chris will know these stories of the number of inventors I've been to, and you go to their garden shed, we're going to make thousands of these. You can't even make one in your garden shed. You're right, designed for manufacturing at volume.
And there's a lot of help out there for those kind of activities.
Yeah.
So, you know, it is about reaching out and don't assume.
And that can be brave.
Yeah.
But you have to make time for it. But the fact that, you know, people are here today means that they want to find out.
I want to. There's a question coming about, are there other clusters in the UK in robotics, autonomous systems? And yes, the short answer to that is yes, there are. We kind of started first, but there are other regions in the UK that are developing similar activities, and we are talking to them because it is important that we engage and share knowledge between these different activities. And one of the key things for me is that in the West Midlands, we're trying to focus our activities on the needs of the West Midlands. But for example, there's a cluster being created or been created in Cumbria. And in Cumbria, their main interest is nuclear. Not surprisingly, that's the biggest single customer that they've got. But the reason they want to engage with us is the startups and the robot integrators and such like in that region want to sell to other industries. They don't want to be dependent on a single customer. So it's important that we do join these activities up in the UK to help businesses across the whole of the UK be successful. But our focus in the West Midlands is the needs of West Midlands industry. I just wanted to stress that point. Tom, you got anything to add to that?
No. No, I think if we, like I said at the beginning, if we can get it right here, it will help the likes of Cumbria where it is a single window. We have so much here. And the diversity will give us that advantage over some of the other areas in how we can grow at the speed we can get to. And I think one of the things I was going to say earlier on is that a lot of the things when you look up there, that we need to let the return on investment, but we need to not be scared of adopting it. I think there is an element of fear in adopting it. I don't know if it's an element of fear in the cost of it or the element of fear of will it work? How will it work? What will I do with it? And I think what you need to understand is today's technology, just to use it, we don't need to upskill so much just to use it, because it should be good enough to be standalone and press a button to make it work. To keep moving it on, then we need to upskill. But as I've said many times before, I think if we upskilled everybody in the country up one level, we've solved the problem. We don't need to upskill hundreds of levels up to be able to get to where we are or where we need to be. So I think, yes, I think there is the other clusters. I think they are all, we do have to join together. I think communication is definitely the key to making this work across the whole country. We need UK PLC to benefit out of this. But the West Midlands cluster is a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. We're running out of time, so I'll just ask the panellists maybe to wrap things up. Chris, have you got any final comment?
Yeah, I mean, I've enjoyed the journey. The last 12 months being with the cluster has been a steep learning curve for me, and I'd urge people to get involved. The more information we get, the more problems we can solve as a cluster, the more we learn, the more we can help West Midlands.
Thank you. Tom, anything to add to what you just said?
I think I'm going to be around here for a while, as will some of the other people. It genuinely is. If you have anything that you think we haven't covered or we need to know or we don't understand, this is a learning journey for us as well. We're not claiming to know all the answers. So come with your problems. Let's start it now. We're going to be here for a little while. Bring anything you want to do. Grab any one of us. I'm volunteering everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Tom.
Tom. Rachel?
And I think my final one is a similar request, but not about those that want our help, but those who want to be part of the helping community. At the moment, we're a group of 8-10 people who are all putting time and effort into this. We know we are not the best at everything, and we welcome more help so that we can get more message out and help more companies.
Great. Thank you. Please join me in thanking Chris, Tom and Rachel. Thank you for your participation.